Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. We're talking about World War II, and you can't talk about World War II, I have learned, without talking about World War I. So you're training for flight school, and my question before break was, what's going on in Europe in 1944?
Yeah, what happened in 1900, most of the countries in Europe, including France, and Spain and England and the Dutch and even the United States had gone out in the world, and they had colonies because
Right.
we had sailing ships, and we had colonies all over the world. As a matter of fact, England in 1900 controlled 25% of the world. That's a lot. But the Germans felt left out. So in 1900, the Germans were determined to insert themselves as a power in the world. So they were building a strong navy, which was a direct threat to England. They had an army of 850,000 men. And it was a fearful thing because that led to the arms race in Europe. And the British and the French and the Russians had an alliance to protect themselves against Germany. And by 1914, Germany and France and England and Austria, it became a powder keg. All the people in Europe knew that a war was going to take place, and it would only take a spark to set it off. That spark came on June the 28th, 1914. The Archduke
Ferdinand.
Ferdinand and his wife, Duchess Sophia, were in Serbia to attend a festival. It happened to be her birthday, so he wanted her to have a good time.
Nice.
He'd been warned that it was a dangerous situation, he shouldn't do it. But he insisted, and they were riding in an open automobile at the parade route when a young Serb, 25 years old, ran out of the crowd with a pistol, shot both of them one time. Within 45 minutes, they died in each other's arms. That was June the 28th. On July the 28th, Austria declared war against Serbia. A few days later, on August the 3rd, Germany declared war against France, and World War I had started.
And where were we in that mix? What were we doing? Just watching this evolve?
In the United States, we were doing nothing because we didn't win any part of it. Europe was a long way away, and we didn't want any part of that war.
And your father was in that war.
Yes. The reason why the United States did get into that war, the Germans in 1917 declared that they would sink any ships that were around England or the Mediterranean that they saw, unrestricted submarine warfare. So our president went before Congress, Wilson, and declared war against Germany, and the American troops started in World War I.
And that's what got us going.
Right. Now, as far as World War I went, it was a horrible thing. The plan that the Germans had was to go through Belgium, outflank the French, and move on to Paris. They knew if they could conquer Paris, the war was over. But they ran into an expeditionary force of British and French troops, and the two armies clashed there for 2.5 months. The Germans lost about 300,000 men.
Wow.
That's a lot of men.
Yes, sir.
And so did the French and the English. And the Germans, they were worn out, the soldiers, and the supply lines couldn't catch up. So consequently, they moved out and they retreated to an area around Verdun. Now, I've been to Verdun many times, and they dug in at Verdun. And the British and the French dug in too. And they had this area between the two armies. It was called no man's land. When I say dug in, I don't mean just trenches. I mean living spaces way underground with barbed wire out there. And I tell you, it was a horrible, horrible thing because men were dying every day. And it was a stalemate. And you talk about the unknown soldier. There were about 150,000 left in the no man's land because they couldn't bring them out of there. Too dangerous. Anything that moved out there was fair game. Now, the Germans had these siege guns. They were 6 and 8 inch cannons. We used to have some of those guns right up here in Birmingham on the mountain overlooking our city.
Over on Redmont.
Yeah, that's right on Red Mountain. But anyway, anything that moved on that battlefield was subject to be killed. Now, I was in France several years ago and I went to Verdun, and they had this building there in Verdun. It's very low, but it's made out of concrete, and the windows are about 3 inches thick. And I looked in those windows. As far as you can see are remains of all the soldiers.
Oh, my.
And they couldn't identify these soldiers. And I mean, there are thousands of them in that building. Thousands. So World War I was a horrible war. And the armistice, thank goodness, was signed on the 11th of November in 1918. And the Germans returned to their homeland as heroes.
Relatively short war.
Right. But they had a lot of problems in Germany. And they had street wars. They were short on food. But in 1933, a little German that had fought in World War I came to power. His name was Adolf Hitler.
Things changed.
Adolf Hitler. And what he did, he was determined to build Germany back into a power.
And when we come back from break, we're going to pick up right where you left off.
Okay.
This is Our Issues Birmingham. I'm mesmerized. I hope you are. We'll be right back.